Hi everyone, welcome to Stash Chat. I just did the countdown and started off my spiel, and then I realized I didn't press the go live button. So thanks for letting us know that you're still on the holding screen. I was thinking, what's going on? Anyway, sorry about the little delay getting ready there. Just slight technical issues, but hopefully we've ironed all that out now. So yeah, welcome to everyone who is joining us for Stash Chats, whether you're watching live or you are watching later on YouTube. So everyone who's in the live chat, do kick us off by letting us know where you are joining from. So I can see we've got Alison joining us in Wales. Alison's joining us in Kent. We've got Acon Daisy Sows in Wales. Who else have we got? We've got Mel in Woking. Hi, so yeah, welcome everyone to Stash Chats. If you're watching on catch up, do leave us a comment to let us know what you think of this episode. If you are new around here, my name is Yvette and I am the co-founder of Stash Hub, which is the sewing organizer app to help with all aspects of your sewing. So I'm really passionate about helping you fall in love with your stash and just really normalizing the idea of having a stash and being proud of that. So that's why every week I talk to different members of the sewing community to find out more about them and get a little peek inside their stashes too. So it's always really exciting. This is actually conversation 95 in the Stash Chat series, if you can believe that. So do go and watch the other videos if you haven't seen them all yet. So in terms of Stash Hub news, the next exciting thing that's coming up is the Knit and Stitch shows in the UK. So I'm going to be at the Ali Pali show in London and the Harrogate show, and at both shows I'm going to be doing a catwalk. So I'm going to be hosting, and then we've got some lovely members of the community who are going to be showcasing their makes and inspiring you to sew your stashes. So that's going to be on the Thursdays of both the London and the Harrogate Knit and Stitch shows. And then I'm also going to be doing a talk about Magic Mockup, which is our tool that allows you to combine a line drawing with a pattern so that you can really easily visualize your project. So do come and say hi if you're going to be at the Knit and Stitch shows this year. And I think I've put a link right down at the bottom of the description to get tickets if you haven't got a ticket for the show yet. So that's my little bit of news. So hopefully I'll see some of you guys in person soon. But let's crack on with today's Stash Chat. So today I'm going to be chatting to Ruth, who is also known as Ithaca Maven on Instagram. And she is the inventor slash creator, I don't know what you like to call yourself, Ruth, of the top-down center-out method for pants fitting. So if you are struggling with trousers, Ruth is who you need to seek out because she has created this whole new method that is completely revolutionary and body neutral. So if you struggle with all the kind of pattern drafting type techniques that you need to do when doing body specific adjustments and you're fed up of doing trial and error on toiles, you're going to really want to try the top down center out method. So I'm sure we're going to hear more about that from Ruth, as well as get to know her a bit better. So do pop any questions that you've got for Ruth in the chat if you're watching live, and let's get Ruth on. Hi Ruth.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you so much for joining us on Stash Chats.
I'm delighted to be here.
Do you want to kick us off by just letting us know like how you first got into sewing? How long have you been sewing?
Oh, crikey. So like I'm originally from Leeds, and I'm of the age where when we were kids in school, we started off sewing. I remember making an apron at school. I didn't really like it so much, and I think I'm not, as some people say, it should be taught in schools still, which it isn't. I'm not really in favor of that because I think it takes you could maybe learn about fibers and textiles in schools, but to actually execute a sewing project or a garment making project takes you a lot of steps and a lot of sort of commitment to get to the end. And I think if you're doing it because you have to, because you're in school and you have to do it, it's not going to be as fun as coming to it, in a voluntary basis. And then I think I got back into it later on when my kids were little. There's a downtown in Ithaca, originally from Leeds, and then I came to the United States. So I've been half British and half American. In our town, there was a new place open called So Green, and my oldest daughter went there. She went to a little camp there, and she came home with this little quilt that she had made, and I was really fascinated. And I went down there and I talked to the owners, an amazing lady called Wendy Skinner, and she had told me about textile waste and the impact of fast fashion. And I didn't really know anything about this, and I was sort of shocked to find out all these things about the fashion industry and how important it was to deal with the excesses of that textile industry. And so this So Green, they were recycling and accepting all kinds of fabric or fiber related projects. And they had a lot of old sewing machines. And it's really amazing. They have these old sewing machines that are still functional. I mean, your fridge isn't functional, your cooker isn't functional for 80 years, but the sewing machines are. And so then I really got into the machines and how the machines worked. And then everything snowballed from there.
Amazing. That's something that I hadn't considered before, because I'm also someone who like didn't enjoy sewing at school. But realistically, if you've got like a 1 hour lesson, by the time you've explained what you're doing and then the clearing up at the end, you've only really got like half an hour to actually do the sewing part. And then like when you think about it, even as a more experienced sewer, getting to make a project that's really satisfying in such a short time period is so hard, and especially when you don't know what you're doing. Like, no wonder it's a lot of people don't enjoy sewing at school, or the teachers seem mean because the teacher's just like, please get something done.
Right, and it's not really suited to sort of what kids want to do, because you've got to pay like minute attention to really boring things. It's like doing the dishes after you've had a lovely meal. Like, you don't really want to do it, but you've got to understitch or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool that there was like a kind of local initiative that really got you into it. And I think those like vintage machines as well are built different, aren't they? They're so robust.
They're really robust. What's really amazing, the part that you really need to replace, which is the needle, it's the same one as you were. So you can just go and buy a modern needle and put it into this vintage machine. But it's really incredible when you think about it. That's a lot of compatibility that's really been lost in other types of equipment. And then you really need also a bit more space. So that's obviously something that you typically, it's not so easy to get hold of. I say like a table is like one of the most important pieces of sewing equipment that you can have. And so that part, that comes maybe later on when you're sort of ready to do it and you're ready to, get the project, and you need pants that fit.
Yeah, amazing. So how kind of, when you sort of got into sewing, were you starting with like garment projects, or did you start making sort of smaller things?
I think I started off with smaller things, but I had my eye on making something that you could wear, and I think I had a friend, like I used to be part of a knitting group. I was like a really big knitter, actually, and I was like a fairly early member of Ravelry, which was really cool. I loved Ravelry, and I used to go to the New York State Sheep and Wool Festival, which is coming up in October. And one of the things, that you knit a certain amount of hats and scarves, but then you want to knit a sweater or a jumper, as I call them in the old days. I know that whole pants trouser thing is kind of funny. And so I would, knit this jumper, and it was like, oh, it didn't really fit. So I like, how are you going to get it? How are you going to get it to fit? And I was having a lot of trouble with that. And then after a while, in knitting, there's a thing between actually knitting your jumper in pieces and sewing it together, or knitting it as an all-in-one. And then after a while, I got fed up of doing like the all-in-one or knitting it in pieces, because you're kind of making the fabric as well as fitting it. So I thought, well, why don't I, cut to the chase, buy the fabric, sew it, and then I'll figure out how to fit. And so I kind of switched over from knitting and crochet into sewing.
That's really cool.
And then I had a friend, so we would meet at Wegmans. People if know Wegmans, actually, and we'd have dinner there. And there was a part of quite a few people that would do this. And my friend said to me, "Oh, you're going to be stuck on that fitting thing for a while." And that was absolutely correct. She was correct. I was stuck on the fitting thing. I've never gone back to knitting, actually.
So you, like, when you got into like fitting with the sewing patterns, did you get kind of like books and try and sort of figure it out in the traditional ways?
Yes, I figured out, and at first, because I was sort of doing the knitting and then the knit fabric, so I actually started off with knits, and people said, well, if you want to sew knits, you need an overlocker. And I actually had the overlocker really before I had a nice sewing machine. And there was a guy who has an amazing dealership. It's outside. So we live in a very rural area. And you could go there, you buy an overlocker, and they gave you a free lesson that came with the overlocker. And so I was like whizzing up t-shirts and leggings and things like that for my kids and nieces. And so after a while, though, that got, wanted to sort of move on and go to woven fabric, because that was sort of more consistent in terms of its behavior. And so that's when things, I started to say, well, maybe I'd like to have some pants or trousers that fit me. And I was sort of approaching this milestone birthday. I said, well, I really can't be wearing these skinny leggings anymore. I've got to wear some nice trousers. And that's really how I always liked trousers. And that's how I really got into sort of thinking more about pants, because it was really this conundrum that people were really having difficulties to get their pants to fit. And so I was like, oh, well, let me try it out. And I saw all those conundrums that everybody talked about sort of pretty much right away. And then after a while, I was wondering, is there a better way? Is there a different way? Is there a more consistent way? And so I started like sort of playing around, experimenting around. And for me, now I've talked about this before, but the big breakthrough, is that not the right word? But I was realizing that in fact the crotch seam was a line and not a shape. Because everybody said, oh, it has to be the shape, that fits your body. And people would even do things like take bendy rulers. Actually, this is sort of me. You see, it's kind of like this middle-aged lady, low, and with a little tummy, and they say, well, that's the shape that you should have on your pattern. And I realized that it doesn't really matter, because it's just a line, and you can make that line have any shape, and that really got set me off. And I'm talking about that a little bit on my Substack. If people want to look at Substack, I'm going to do a series talking about how, all those different things that went into, developing this method, because I have a book coming out. So I'm really excited about that, which is really going to be a really practical, detailed how to do the method and how to get it done by yourself, because that's really the reality of what everybody's facing. People don't have fitting fairies to come to their house and pin them up all beautifully. They have to do it by themselves, and there's no way out of that. So this will help, I think.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like maybe we should talk about the method first a little bit more before we like kind of go into like why it's so great, just so that people who haven't heard of top down center out can like get some context about what we're talking about, and then we can hype up the book again a bit later, because I think it's going to be such a useful tool.
Yeah. So the method itself is, so there's two parts of the method. There's the platform, creating a platform for fitting, and there's the actual fitting process itself. So the first part, which is creating a platform, is you take your pattern and you must fit in a toile or a sort of a fabric that approximates what you're going to end up with in your final fabric. And the key thing here is you're going to make half the pant so that you can sort of see your crotch seam. And it really must be fabric. That's really key. And you also, first of all, you really fit a waistband of your pattern. And that's really key, because that essentially sets the top level of your pants or trousers. And the hem is going to be your bottom level. And also the magic of fitting happens in between. So you have your fitting waistband. It must be a real waistband. It can't be a piece of string or something that holds out your pant. It'll be authentic, because everyone's flesh is slightly different, and how you fit that and how you create it is different. And then it's really a design-led approach, because you've really got to consider the design. How does the design work? There's all different kinds of crotch curves, and they're all quote unquote cut differently. And cutting is just simply how the fabric pieces are cut and sewn together to create the grain, because pants are really this very actually sophisticated blend of off-bias fabric grain and straight grain. And everybody will know that, especially like if you've been a knitter, the idea is that the properties of the fabric actually contribute to the fitting or the design of the garment. And then the third part of this is to have two mirrors. And you have to have the mirrors so that you can see in front of you what is happening behind you. You can't sort of do it separately. You have to do the front and back at the same time. Because pants are kind of like this tensegrity structure. People know what a tensegrity structure is, something that is very finely balanced. You change one thing and the other parts of the architecture respond appropriately in according to that change. And so you have to be able to see what you're doing. And once you have that mirror set up, you can go ahead for the fitting process. And the fitting process is a design-led process. So for example, for most pants, not all pants, the center front that is the top level is like the top of the waistband, and then you have the crotch point, which is at the bottom of the crotch seam line, and then it travels right up to the back at the center back, or you could travel in either direction. So all these seam lines have to be positioned on your body like your architecture, and so the first thing to do is to position your crotch seam and your inseam. They're kind of like a unit, they work together, and then you work from the center out to set the appropriate circumferences. So you have the length and you have the circumferences, and you also have the balance that's appropriate for your body, because your body is going to be balanced very differently to the dress form or the average form that the pattern was created for. And I always say that Humpty Dumpty is the only person that has the perfect figure, because Humpty is completely an egg. And in fact, biologically speaking, and I am actually trained as a scientist, at one point we all were eggs. And so we've changed a lot in morphology since then. But the egg is sort of perfect because it's perfectly round, the cross section. So it's the same body depth as body width. And so we just have to adapt the pattern for our particular body depth and width. And everyone has that unique combination.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so Acorn Daisy, who I think is Vivian, was saying, I love this method. It's so liberating not to have to label all your issues. And I think as well, it's really hard if you're new to fitting and you don't know what all of the adjustments are called, you don't know how to look up how to do them on the flat pattern as well. So, if you don't know that, the thing you need is a full seat adjustment, for example, how are you going to find out how to do that adjustment if you don't know what it is? Whereas I think top down, center out is much more intuitive, just sort of making it fit to your specific body rather than doing a twirl, then it doesn't fit, then you try one adjustment and that makes it worse, and then you have to try something else.
Yeah, the problem with the adjustment, and I don't really want to knock them because those are the textbook way of doing things, and it does deliver, it works for a lot of people, is that you don't quite understand it, because essentially you're privileging your body, and you think, well, why shouldn't I privilege my body? I'm fitting for my body and my unique contours. But there is everybody has a slightly different approach to their body. And I actually have here, it's kind of like a little sheet, which is that these are different things that people have described their body, and everybody knows their body in very unique and special ways. But that's just one element of the relationship between the body and the design. So you don't know really until you get to meet the design how your body is going to build that relationship with the design. So it's more like fitting as therapy. It's more like establishing that relationship. And the problem with these body morphology approaches, or say body part approaches, is first of all, when you change the body part, in a tensegrity structure, you change one thing and you change a bunch of other things, so that you have that cascading effect, which is not, you're not necessarily improving the fit. And also that assessment, if it works or if it doesn't work, did you do it not enough or too much? And then when it works, like, what does it tell you about your body? So I would do things that are called, for example, knock knee adjustments. And I used to think, oh, I have this really weird body, it's impossible to fit. And then I was like, hang on a second. Like, I don't have this really weird body. In fact, compared to many people, particularly in the plus size community, they cannot even go into a shop and buy clothes that fit them, which I actually am privileged enough to be able to do. And so it cannot be one rule for one type of body and another rule for another type of body. And people are, oh, well, these larger bodies are more difficult to fit. I was like, hang on a second. Do they have 3 legs or something? What is so difficult about this? And if you're a biologist or scientist, you want a more universal approach. And that's really important to you. And so I say, if this is going to work, it has to work universally for all body types. And then also all styles, but that becomes a bit more complicated, because you have to really understand a style in order to adapt it to your body. So I think this is really the method for people who really enjoy thinking about design and style, and so trying things out, really, because you can try out a lot of different styles that your body may not have had access to. You don't know. A lot of the fitting advice is sort of style based. It's like what we call flatters here, like that. That's not the job of fit. The job of fitting is to, whatever style you desire, whatever style you choose, is to make to fit you, and then you decide, do you like it or do you not like it?
Yeah, brilliant. And I think as well, that's really important, because like usually when you buy a pattern, it's because you like the design of it and you think, yeah, I want to wear that on my body. Whereas then if you do a bunch of adjustments and you end up essentially redrafting the pattern so that it's so different from what it originally was intended, you might as well have not bought that pattern and just, started with something else, so that you're able to stay true to the original design. I think is a really important part of top down, center out.
Yeah, that comes. So I think a lot of the fitting advice in, let's say, the sewing community comes from people or professionals who are in the middle of developing a pattern or making a pattern, as well as fitting it on the body. So they know the style, they have that already, that design in their heads. But we actually have some advantages, because we're coming to it, as I'm going to argue, we come to it like a contractor. So those people are like the architects. They have the blueprint, and they sort of, let's say, specify what building materials you're going to use. Is it going to be what type of woven fabric? Is it going to be denim or twill or whatever, or canvas? And then on the other hand, we're sort of the contractor. So we have to say, okay, on this landscape, we want a slightly closer fit, or we want to narrow the legs or something like that. So it's a different approach for those reasons. And so we can actually have advantages over, and we can actually also take our time. We can break down the process. I always say that if you went into a professional atelier and you were like, it's always considered the super deluxe, elite experience that you go to be fitted. And if they came and they brought out a little waistband and said, okay, first of all, we're going to fit your waistband, you would not be very impressed. And so, but it's a kind of a silly thing, but when you're by yourself and you're doing it all by yourself, that's fine. It's no problem. You can parade around your house just wearing a waistband, which people do when they get into this method. It's pretty funny to think about it, but it's surprising. It's like this humble little thing, but it actually is very important for the architecture of the garment.
Yeah, for sure. Did you want to show any of your slides about the top down, center out?
Yeah, so I have a few slides here from a talk that I gave recently locally, and the first thing, it's really about the fashion industry, which we know is one of the most polluting, sort of destructive industries. And I think this adds a new urgency to the business of making our own clothes, which is to get away from fast fashion. We have all the same reasons, that people did it traditionally, for creativity or to express yourself. but now it's actually more of an imperative, because it's almost something we have to do to really save the planet. And what you're looking at here is that we know that there's a lot of labor violations in this fast fashion industry. But on the left-hand side here, you can see this. This is jeans that were put in the compost, and the cotton, or the natural fiber part of the garment, has decayed, and you're left with the sort of the petroleum polyester derived part. And the reason that that petroleum polyester derived part is put in there is in order to make a garment that will fit more people, because it's stretchy. And those are the fibers that we don't really need if you make clothes that fit your body out of natural fibers, that you don't need that stretch. But part of fashion is to put that stretch in. But also it limits the kind of designs that you can have, because when you're fitting with stretch, you're using your body. So you're upholstering your body. Is like the sofa, and you see the outline of your body, but you don't see how bodies collaborate with fabric to create an overall design. And that's really what the magic of trousers is. It's not just you, it's not just the design, but it's that collaboration between the body and the pant. And so we all know that humans vary enormously. This is a famous photograph of Olympic athletes. And so let's say theoretically these people in peak physical perfection, but there's a lot of variation. Now, we think there's a lot of variation, but in actual reality, when you're a biologist, there actually isn't a lot of variation. Everyone's all pretty much the same. Everyone has 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. Their head always faces forwards. You don't see people with their heads facing backwards. So, but they obviously vary in terms of circumference. But all these things are characteristically of the species, let's say, of the human species. And I work in a veterinary medical school, and in fact dogs have the biggest size variation, much more so than humans. The variation between the smallest adult human and the largest adult human is something like about 2.5 times as large, but in dogs it's much greater than that. There's a much greater sort of body size variation, but we still recognize that all these are dogs. And so we think, like, conceptually, psychologically, we look at humans and we see the variation because we're sort of psychologically attuned to that. But pretty much we're all the same. We just vary in these basic parameters. And particularly when it comes to plus size clothing, and we did see some companies start to really look at and take this market more seriously. But since the advent of Ozempic, a lot of those companies actually have cut back. So the options for plus size clothing have greatly diminished. Somebody told me yesterday that 1 in 8 adults in the United States is on some kind of Ozempic type drug, which I was kind of shocked by. But
it's crazy how quickly that's like taken hold as well, to like even affect the availability of clothing.
Exactly, it really is. And so, but particularly when it comes to trousers, even let's say these companies wanted to give you what you need, it almost isn't possible, because there's so many different body parameters that you have to satisfy to have pants that fit you, made out of natural fibers, that they can't. There's no way that a shop could even stock that many, pants tailored to that many parameters. So I think the only way out in this 21st century is to make yourself, or to get together with someone that can make it for you. And in the traditional sewing community, this is an article from I think around 2000 in a sewing magazine. They talk a lot about this. Obviously, they recognize this issue for a long time, but a lot of the conversation was based around what makes you look good. So it was a style-based conversation. It's like, what is flattering to you? Choose patterns that emphasize this most attractive part of your body, something like that. It's kind of, and I was like, hang on a second. We really want to separate the fit of clothing as opposed to the style of clothing. So, we really should be able to do that. And by principle, everybody should have access to quality garments, and everyone can should be able to fit quality garments. So this is these are the Fremantle pants actually that we made earlier on the Substack group. And so you have these three components. You have the design, you have the blueprint with the flat part, and then you have your final finished product. But this is a lot like when you get into architecture. It's a lot like you have whatever the architect thinks it should look like or hopes it will look like, and you have your 2D plan, and then you, as the contractor, you get to build it into the final product. And I'm just going to, I think, skip ahead. I don't want to take up too much time, but the idea here is that you get to, can I skip or not? I just have to.
I think if you just, you can. Do you know which side you want?
Yeah, so that we have to have this, so the body neutral approach is we're taking this design perspective, sort of collaborating between the body, the pattern, and ultimately the fabric. So fabric is kind of like that third wheel where you get can sometimes surprise you. So when you look at design of pants, this is great. This is a ballet dancer who is his hair is lifted his leg very, very high. It's actually not really wearing pants. He's but essentially he's wearing very tiny pants. But here you can't lift the leg quite as high because the amount of fabric here is restricting you. And so this is really created to design. Like we have here this sort of narrow leg. Now that's a certain look that is created, but there is a consequence to that look in a sense of lifting the leg. But if let's say we added more fabric, you can lift that leg higher. And so this is getting to know designs, how the body moves in design is a really key part of understanding that design, because ultimately the fabric is flat. And this is historical, this is traditional, this is ever since fabric was started to be made, that there's only been two directions that you can take fabric, which is warp or weft, sort of scientifically speaking, X or Y. And so your only decisions really are, do you want more or less X or Y? So that's kind of like 4 different decisions that should be able to account for all of your fitting. And so when we when we sort of think about this, it's sort of the idea is hopefully to sort of simplify it. And that's really what this method does. So this is just a couple of examples here I'm showing you. Here you see 2 figures. Now they have the same overall vertical distance, let's say from the waist down to the hem. But where they differ is simply in the division between the torso and the legs. So the amount of vertical in each leg and the amount of vertical in the torso. So once you start to sort of break things down this way, you see how into the basic parameters, and you set yourself up to adapt whatever design you want to these parameters. That's how you can dial in the fit and also keep the design going. And then here, so we have here, you don't really have to analyze yourself in the way that we set up the toile, because we know that your leg length, for example, like any other body parameter, is somewhere on the spectrum between the shortest possible leg length and the longest possible leg length. So we try to set up the toile in a way that you can dial in wherever you are on the spectrum of body morphology for all the different parts. And then it's always and then another way that we're fitting is we're dialing in your body depth with your body width. So I always like to use Humpty as my example. I just love Humpty. So Humpty is an ovoid with he pronouns, and Humpty has this wonderful outfits he wears with little waistbands, but essentially that his body depth is the same as his body width. So very few people will be Humpty, but in fashion, of course, what they call the silhouette, you could artificially change that up. So you could add in things to make yourself wider, or you could add in things to make yourself deeper, your body depth versus your body width, and we sort of all know how that happens. And this is, so we're doing this artificially, but we could also be doing this naturally with different types of bodies. So essentially, everybody is somewhere on the spectrum. Here we're looking at Flat Stanley, who is famously flat. So he has much more width than depth. He has virtually no depth. In the middle, we have our perfect figure, Humpty, with his width equal to his depth. And let's say on the right here, we have a pregnant person where their width, their body depth, sorry, is much greater than their body width. And it doesn't matter if the person has a body depth because of what's happening on the front or what's happening on the back. In terms of the architecture of the trouser, it's actually the same thing. So I was talking the other day, like big Tom, no bum is essentially the same as small Tom, big bum. But essentially what you do between those two different landscapes is you're moving the crotch point. You're sort of, depending on where you divide the front and the back of your garment architecture in order to adapt it to the landscape of the body. So I hope that gives people some sort of introduction to the method and sort of how we think about this and how it all plays into being body neutral and thinking about the design.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really interesting. Shall I take the slides down now?
Yeah.
Just put that back. Yeah, that's really cool. Vivienne in the chat says, I never thought I'd like trousers like the Fremantles and would never have tried to make them without the Substack sew along, but I really like them. Same with the olive pants. It's opened up a lot of options. That's really cool.
Yeah, so are there any questions in it?
I'll read them out so you don't have to worry. But yeah, let us know if you're watching live and if you've got any questions for Ruth about top down, center out, or anything else that you want to know. Yeah, I had an inkling that you might be a scientist because I was reading one of your posts and you were talking about endoplasmic reticulum. And I was like, people don't talk about endoplasmic reticulum like normally because I trained as a biochemist. That's on my background.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so you totally understand that. And I think there's a lot of people coming into, who want to have professional looking garments and have expertise in other areas. And they're bringing all of that into their sewing or their making practice. And I sort of traditionally, it's very coded older female, I would say. And what I see is that is changing. And it's also really important that changes. But I think, therefore, in order for that to change, you need higher quality education, about how to fit. And some of the, like, for example, so when you look at something that's universal, you have to make sure you're not using gendered language, for instance, so that it can be used in a more inclusive fashion. And that's the same thing. Sometimes I see patterns that where they split up the pattern into, so you also must have to buy two patterns, one for each size grouping, and that's kind of the classical view of fashion. There's slicing and dicing populations. I'm like, please, I'd rather, if that's what it takes, charge me more. I want to see the whole range. I want to see the complete data set, and I want to see how that pattern is created. And one of the things that we always do is I always take the largest size of any pattern that I'm interested in, because we're spending a lot of time making these patterns. And this actually is the shop pattern, which we're making right now in our Substack group. But this actually is a very small scale model of the largest size. And you can see how good it is. It's really true to the shape of the garment, the architecture of the garment. It's really, really nice. It has this beautiful, very tapered sort of banana-ish leg. I think they call it a barrel leg. And it has, you can't even really see it here because I have the same fabric, but there's a two-part section to the leg, so it has a different part on the bottom. I sort of colored that in a little bit with the pen, so you could see that seam line. But it's a really nice. It's beautifully shaped, so you get a sense of how the architecture works, and you can just get a sense too of like the crotch seam, how it's really a nice swoop. It's a nice ride. Well, that's why they call it the saddle, from center front to center back.
That's really cool. It must be so satisfying as well to see, like in the Substack group, everyone making the same pattern but for different bodies, and how that kind of works.
I think that's one of the most powerful things. There was a movement for a while to try to find people with your measurements or people with your body shape, and the idea was that if you could do that, you could sort of copy their fit modifications, and that was always a little bit difficult because, first of all, they may not even like the same styles that you like. They may have, so let's say they have different taste, but also because just in terms of circumferences, you don't know how far those circumferences are separated from each other. So you could have the one person with a certain measurement for their waist and hip is might be much taller in the torso than another person, and actually that would need a totally different fit modifications. So I think the surprising thing is when we talk about things on the Substack and this group on the Substack, you see that the same changes so somebody might need for that to get their pattern, body depth and body width, to dial that in for their particular body. It might be the same, it might be a completely different body shape. And I think it's very powerful and liberating. It puts you in charge of your fitting. And I think it's made a big difference, and it helps people to understand that there is this universal aspect to fitting, because we all have essentially the same human bodies. There are small variations, and there's asymmetries. For example, there's front to back asymmetries, there's left to right asymmetries, but how that all gets dialed in as we move ahead with fitting. And I think for me that was also great, because at that point when I started doing this work and I realized that it was going to be this universal way that accommodated all bodies, because all bodies really, they still have to dial in that same split between the torso and the legs and all those other parameters. I think it takes some practice mentally to look at things in this way, because we're so conditioned to be blaming our bodies. And I get emails and people will say, well, since menopause, blah, 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 or since when I was young, I had this happen, and so that is so, everyone to some extent has some degree of body dysmorphia. And sometimes it used to be really surprising, because people would say things, oh, this, I am this, my butt is this, and sometimes I would look at these pictures that people would send me, and I think, I actually don't agree that your butt is this, but that doesn't matter, because that's how they feel and think about their conditioning. I would say I'm not going to change how you feel about your body, but I will, if you go through this method, we'll get things to fit you, but you have to try to put that aside. There's a certain discipline to this while you go through all these different parameters to get the fit onto your body.
Have you done like a section in your book about the kind of body neutrality approach of the method, and like why it's important not to get like hung up on what you think your body is like?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was it's been great, because I sometimes talk in sort of more academic language, and I've had a lot of help with this book to really make it readable, to make it accessible. It's been sent to people who are brand new sewists to see can they use it to make pants that fit them. And I've been fortunate enough to partner with Martine Barnaby, who's a professor at SUNY Cortland and in the fine arts, has done some really amazing illustrations to accompany the text. And we really went through it with, this is sort of the philosophy, whether, how to think differently when you come to the fitting process, and how that's going to turn out, to troubleshoot all that kind of stuff.
When you kind of were thinking about kind of developing this method, did you sort of have any idea like how kind of revolutionary it would be, and how much it would like help people, not just on their fitting journeys, but also like with their own self-image?
That's a really interesting question. I think there was some point when somebody said to me, oh, will it work for men, I think, or something like that. And I was like, but I think, why wouldn't it? because I didn't really think in those terms at the moment. At some point when I started out, I thought, oh, maybe I'm going to make an ultimate wrinkle, read the wrinkle kind of encyclopedia type thing. And I was like, it was so frustrating because like I would make all these sounds. I'll do a before and after for everything, and it wasn't turning out like it should. And I was sort of like, this is not really working. And so once I sort of started to think, well, when you have this method, why does it work? Why does fitting the waistband work? And then I realized it's because of these sort of basic parameters that you can then fit around. And I was a little bit shocked because I think to me conceptually it was simple. So I've been doing this for a couple of years now, so it's kind of become more second nature to me. And I think I still see people struggling with a lot of this, and I see people getting frustrated because it's very hard to move out of that traditional way of fitting into this new approach. And so I think that sort of, I was really excited, of course, because I was like, this is a universal tool that can help everybody. But it doesn't if you like traditional ways of doing it, it doesn't take anything away from those.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm really excited to try it. I haven't actually tried top down, center out myself, but I think it's going to change my fitting a lot because like my waistband is very slanted. Like I wear it much higher at the back than at the front. And so in traditional fitting methods, it means I have to do a massive full seat adjustment to get that back to where I want it to be, like on the waistband. But starting with the waistband actually makes a lot more sense as like that's the starting point, right? That's where everything hangs from. So yeah, it's really different approach.
Actually, can you go back to those slides a second? Do we have time on it? So I think so let me just skip ahead. So this is an illustration from a friend of mine. It's kind of like a composite of me and some other people. And here I am just sort of fitting a waistband by itself. It's kind of like this very weird thing. And I think for me, that was kind of always the puzzling part about why this method works and why methods work so well when you only take one single body measurement, because the waistband allows you to set your front to back depth without having to measure it. And at the time when I was kind of trying to figure this out, I was on Instagram a lot because I had cancer actually. I was chemo, like when you do all these escapist things and I was like flick through Instagram looking at all these amazing images that they have on Instagram. And I found the work of this artist called Michaela Stark, and she basically uses these bindings to modify her body. It's very beautiful. I think she has an exhibition going on in London right now, and she's used to Galliano and other designers. And it was really amazing because I could see really how it's the amount of stretch, the amount of pressure on the body, how you like your body to be. You actually have scope for potentially a lot of different waistbands on your torso, but there's nobody else that can dial in the fit of that except you, because only you know how much squish you like. Only you know how wide or how long you want your waistband to be. Only you know where it should be positioned on the torso. And obviously that's a collaboration between you and the design of the pant. So this was, once I sort of figured that out, and I figured I didn't need to measure other parts because the waistband essentially was a proxy for doing all those other measurements, and they would all be balanced accordingly as the waistband was fixed. And sometimes when people are doing this method for the first time, there's a tendency, because it is so sort of weird and silly, to have that be a little bit loose or to change that position slightly, which is one of the reasons why I suggest to people starting off with a straight waistband makes things easier, because it's very easy just to cut out another one at the end if you find it's not quite right. And also because a lot of people on their torso, there's really only one position where that straight waistband sort of fits and it meets flush at the center front. Whereas when you have a curved waistband, you can position that in quite a few different ways according to how curvy you are, where you want it, how wide it is. And so that makes it a little bit more challenging. But once you get that dialed in, so sometimes when people come to this method for the first time, they make it a little bit loose, and then everything else ends up a little bit too loose. The whole trouser will be nicely balanced on the body. It will look good, probably be acceptable to wear out the house, but it won't be quite how you want it. And then you realize, oh, it's because my waistband was a little bit too loose. And then, you figure that out with practice. So you just move ahead and get that dialed in. And I have here, this is some comments from people that I always end with what gives people feelings of satisfaction, which is pants or trousers that fit your body. It's not just, so there's really, once you cross that Rubicon and you have pants that fit, you won't be going back.
Oh yeah. And who knew it was such a rarity as well, to get pants that fit. I think when you sew your own clothes, it makes you realize how bad everything in the shop would fit, or you can get really picky about it, my shoulders half an inch too wide, or these trousers aren't exactly right in the rise or whatever. And then you're like, if I bought this in the shop, I'd be absolutely fine with it. It's just because I sew, and now I'm being really picky with it.
I think that's great. Also, not everybody is going to be able to sew or want to sew. But then, I see already the people around me, I see that I'm influencing them. They're like, oh, is this fabric really quite right? Ruth, what do you think? Or something. Or they're looking at things more critically. And that's going to be a huge part of consumer education, to get people to understand how detrimental fast fashion is, not just for the planet, but also, for what they could be doing and the kinds of garments they could be wearing.
Yeah, exactly. People need to know that there's better out there. They don't have to resort to sad clothes that don't fit and they just break straight away. They can demand more. Better quality, less quantity, I think, is what we all need from the fashion world, isn't it?
Right. And that's the message from Patrick Grant of the Great British Sewing Bee. I think he's really doing an amazing work. It seems like the UK is really moving ahead with a really wonderful community there. I wish I was coming to the knitting and stitching show. Actually, I'm from very quite near Harrogate, actually. I'd love to go there.
Maybe next year you'll have to come to the UK and join the shows. Yeah, it's always good fun. All right, we've got a minute left. So if anyone's got any quick bits they want to pop in the live chat, you've got to get those in now. But yeah, I've put the links to Ruth on Instagram and Substack, and the Threads article where you wrote about top down, center out, in the description of this video. So make sure you go and check those out. And stay tuned for Ruth's book. Yeah,
it's coming out soon. I'm very excited. Thank you so much for mentioning that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really groundbreaking. I think it's going to take it to the next level, because I'm assuming everything kind of blew up for you after the Threads article.
Well, that was a little bit abbreviated. I mean, it's a magazine. You've got to remember. I mean, there's 6 pages to do a welt pocket. I'm not going to be able to fit everything about trouser fitting into 8 pages. And so what I was hoping at the time was that people would go onto Instagram and get all the rest of the information. But I think also it was kind of frustrating for people, because I would put information in a very abstract way, because I didn't know, what body you're dealing with, what kind of trouser style you're dealing with. And so this will, having the book will make it more concrete, and, you'll be able to open it up and look at it. And so that's clearly been needed. And I've been working on this for a while.
Yeah, you've all over the last however many years you've been talking about the method, you've gathered up all that knowledge and all the questions and suggestions and everything from the community. And I know the sewing community is so generous with their feedback as well. So yeah, I can imagine that the book's going to be so comprehensive. So yeah, you have to convince everyone that designs trouser patterns to be we sell this on the side, and then you'll actually see people making your trouser pattern, because they'll be able to get ones that fit.
Oh yeah, I mean, really, it's been great. I really hope to see more contemporary styles of trousers, and I also would love to see more it takes a lot of development to make a really great inclusive design trouser that functions equally across all the different body circumferences. And that's actually why I'm really enjoying working with the shot pant. I think that is one example of that. I don't have time to try out all the patterns, but I do have, to get back to stash, I do have a really extensive pattern stash, and I really love looking at and checking out all the different patterns. And it's really important to have organized, to be have that stash organized so that you can really know what you have and see everything that is in there. Because I'm really a big fan of patterns, and we really need these patterns. I really appreciate the people that really go out and they make these inclusive sized patterns with great contemporary styles. And I really thank you, designers, for doing that.
Amazing. Well, I've got one quick question from Vivienne. What pattern would you suggest people start with if they've never fit trousers before?
That is a great question. So, and I have, there is a list on the Substack of recommended patterns for people to start out with. As I mentioned before, I think it's easiest to start out with the straight waistband. And Gunnar Detheridge, you know, the guy who was on Project Runway, and he makes patterns now. He has a really good inclusive size pattern for trousers as well. And I think that could be like a great little pattern for us to use in the Substack, you know, as like a little refresher. Sometimes between the more complicated projects, I like to do like a refresher pattern. So that would be a good one. And I also recommend, these are not inclusive size, but once you they cover actually a large size. But it's Tomatsu Toda, who was a Japanese American designer who designed for Vogue patterns in the 90s and I think early 2000s, and he designed Hillary Clinton's pantsuits. And he designed trousers for the average woman, and he specialized in plus size women. He would design for Caroline Manheim as well. And so you're getting the same patterns that he's selling in these very high-end luxury fashion. You're getting the same patterns, and they're beautifully designed trousers. And so they go for it. They're very cheap. You can get them on eBay. They're great patterns, actually.
Nice. Awesome. Well, that is a brilliant place to finish it there. So hopefully everyone who's feeling a bit nervous about trousers is feeling much more inspired now to do some fitting and try out a new method. But yeah, thanks so much for talking to us today, Ruth.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out for the book, because yeah, I think Alison's already got her eye on it. She already wants to get one.
I'm going to do that. And I can't wait to come to the UK.
It'll be brilliant. You'll have to do a press tour for the book, and then you can expense it all.
Yeah, good idea.
All right, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you to everyone who's watched and who's joined us live as well. And don't forget to check out all the links in the description, and I'll be back next week. So I'll see you all then. Bye.